Good morning everyone, welcome back. This is going to be the final video for the Outlaw Half series. I think this is day 8, but this is basically going to be the post-race sort of analysis. I'll try and run through each of the different legs, what happened with each. I'm also going to try and give a couple of tips or things I noticed or lessons that I learnt across each of the legs, which will hopefully help out anyone else who's doing, I guess, next year's event or any other future Outlaw Halves at Nottingham. So starting with the overall event, it was brilliant, to be fair. Definitely one of the best 70.3 distances that we've done. There is something about some of these events that they have that big feel event. They feel epic when you're doing them, when you're surrounded by 1,000 other people all racking their bikes, all terrified to jump in the water, all getting ready on the run, all strapping their nutrition to the bike and all that sort of stuff. There is definitely, you do feel like you're part of something a bit epic. I'm sure it's even more magnified when you're doing a full iron, but you definitely get that feeling at this event. We've done some smaller 70.3s before where you just don't get that feeling. Always felt a little bit disappointed at the end. Sort of event that doesn't even have like a photographer. I know it's not a big deal, but anyway, yeah, the overall event is absolutely amazing. Thanks to all the volunteers and the staff and the traffic control people, all that sort of stuff that were there on the day. It obviously can't be done without you. So, in terms of the weekend itself, so we arrived on the Saturday afternoon. We had like a 2.5, 3 hour drive to get there. So we wrapped our bikes on Saturday afternoon. That all went fine. Make sure you take everything you can with you to the transition queue, because you do not want to have to run back to the car park 15 minutes away to get your BTF license or your helmet or something like that. So yeah, on the Saturday we just wrapped the bike. We then went to watch the Future Outlaws little race. That's the kids going around. And then also to the little expo, a few shops. I think there was about a dozen shops there, a few food vans, all that sort of stuff. Checked out the course, checked out the lake. The lake is absolutely massive. So that was a bit daunting as well, knowing as well that you've got to run around it 3 times. So yeah, and then after that we just went to the hotel and chilled out, had dinner. Anyway, on to the Sunday. Woke up about 4, I think it was, maybe a little bit later than that. So we were both swimming off about 6:45ish. I think there was like a 5-minute gap between us. So we headed off to the transition area around a little bit after 5 AM. So then we were in the far car park, which meant we had about a 10-minute walk over with all of our gear to our bikes, just to sort out our, stick your bottle with your nutrition on there, put your towel down with your shoes, all that sort of stuff on. One bit of advice: if you are aiming on a certain time to get there, basically get there 15, 20, 30 minutes earlier than the time you think you need to be there, because it doesn't seem to matter how early you are, you always run out of time. You always find something that needs to be done, needs to be checked, last minute toilet trip, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, managed to rack all the bikes, sorry, not rack all the bikes, but put all the stuff on the bikes okay, get the wetsuit on. It was a little bit chilly on the morning, and the weather had actually not picked up, but it didn't look like it was going to be as bad as predicted. So my target of hitting a sub 2:30 on the bike was back on, because the day before, seeing the weather, I sort of said in my head that I wasn't really going to bother with the bike. I wasn't willing to take the risks on some wet, horrible roads, and I was going to focus on the run again, but it looked like the weather was going to be a bit better now. So the bike leg was back on. Then it was a case of going over to the waiting area. So we heard all the pros and stuff like the elites being called over to the swim start. So we went to watch that. So that was quite good fun. Watched them all come out of the water first, the likes of Andrew Horsfall-Turner, Josh Lewis coming out the eventual winner, Harry Palmer, Tim Don, all those cheering those on. I'm almost like a right fanboy when I'm on the side of these, because I know probably about a dozen of their names. Just screaming them out, cheering them on, where my girlfriend probably just stares at me like I'm a right weirdo. But anyway, then it was Georgie to go off first. So like I say, she went about 5-10 minutes before me, and then it was on to me. I was in one of the red caps, which is the slower swim time. I was hoping to swim around 45 minutes, which to me would have been like quite a conservative time, considering all the effort that I put in. But I ended up having my worst ever swim at 70.3 and swimming a 49-minute swim leg for the 1.9k. I've got no excuses. I basically just couldn't get into a rhythm, or just didn't concentrate for probably 90% of the actual swim. It was only really the last couple of 100 metres where I actually started to sort of focus on the technique that I was using, and I don't know why, but for the first, say, 1700 metres, I just thought that spinning my arms around, I'd just end up going slightly faster than normal just because I've been down the pool. But that isn't how it works, is it? So yeah, like I say, I had the worst swim I've ever had, 49 minutes, which isn't a great start today, but I did have some tips or some things that I noticed during the swim for anyone who's going to be doing this in the future. Okay, so the first one is, if you're a weak swimmer like I am, and when I say I'm a weak swimmer, there were 1,300 people, or around 1,300 people doing this event. I was the 1,160th worst swimmer, or slowest swimmer. So I'm not exaggerating when I say that I'm a poor swimmer in terms of the field. So tip one is to practice swimming long straight lines, because some of the lakes we go to have nice little loops of like 200 metres, 300 metres where you turn and it gets, every 100 metres and it gets broken down in your head mentally, all that sort of stuff. It was incredibly monotonous having to swim. It must have been a kilometre, 1,000 metres before you have to turn. And obviously swimming 1,000 metres for someone as slow as me takes a long time. So the buoy at the end takes a long time before it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then obviously you turn right for about 100 metres, and then you have, what's that, another 800 metres reverse back to the swim exit. So my first tip is, if you're a weak swimmer, try and find an open water swimming venue or somewhere where you can swim just in a straight line for a very long time, as close to possible as the 1,000 metres that you'll be doing on the day, just to get your mind used to just swimming in a straight line and not having to worry about anything else. Sighting was quite difficult because the big buoys are quite far apart. So that's tip number one. Tip number two for the swim: do everything you can to get on the leftmost finger of jumping into the lake. So there's three things that you jump off. I was on the right one, which is the worst one to be on, because you basically have to swim an extra 50 metres to get over to the left one to then continue the straight line up to the end. So 50 metres for me is like a minute 10, a minute 15 onto my time, which was a bit annoying, and I noticed that just walking down to the swim start. And I was secretly hoping that the marshal was going to send me over to the leftmost finger, but she didn't. But I wish I'd sort of pretended not to hear her and just walked down to that one anyway. So that's tip one. That'll save you 50 metres. So that was tip number two. Tip three: the timing mat is a couple of metres before you actually jump into the water, and I didn't really notice it at the time. So I walked over it and then decided to fanny about with my watch and my goggles and my hat, then slowly lower myself into the water, then play around with my watch and goggles again to make sure they weren't leaking, and then decided to start the swim. Don't do that. Basically get everything ready for the second that you step over the timing mat. Get in and just go. I'm not suggesting that you dive in or jump in or anything like that, dive bombing, just because your goggles might come loose, but get everything ready before you step over the timing mat, and then get in the water as quick as you can and just go. It will save you probably 30 seconds, if not a minute, for me. So that was pretty bad on the swim. So coming out of the swim, we were then into transition. Transition was long. If they don't change the transition back to what I assume was a previous shorter version, be prepared for whatever time you're aiming for to add probably 10 minutes onto it. I think at a typical 70.3 I normally spend about 3 minutes in the first transition and then 2 minutes in the second. I'm pretty sure I averaged an 8 and a 7, or I had an 8 and a 7 minute transition this time, which is obviously a huge amount of extra time that you just lost basically. I know everyone's doing the same thing, but like in my head I was hoping to get a sub 450 at this event, but that's gone if you're spending 7 or 8 minutes extra in transition alone. Okay, so anyway, onto the bike. This was the target for the day. The aim for the day was to try and get sub 230. I knew I was going to have to hold around sort of 245 watts, which is about 3.25 watts per kilo for me. My FTP is around 4 watts per kilo at 275. So it's going to be a tough ask really to hold that. I think my previous PB was sort of a 232 at about 230 watts. But obviously, like I say, with the weather holding out, I knew I had to target it on this event because the bike course is fast. So luckily, by the end of this, I did a 228. I think it was 51, 228.51, something like that. So, but unfortunately, I didn't have my power meter because I didn't bother to check the batteries before the event, and they'd basically run out, drained. So I was having to focus on my heart rate and ultimately the average speed. So I knew I was going to need like 36 kilometers plus for this, which I managed. Then in terms of heart rate, I've noticed at other events I sort of hit around the low 160s average over the course of the 90k. So here I averaged, I think it was 165, so obviously slightly more effort, slightly more power was being produced. So that's how we managed to hit the target. Also, my strategy to get the bike PB was to go hard on every single incline, no matter if it was small or long, short or anything like that, just to get the slow bits over as fast as possible, which seems to have worked out really well. Obviously I've hit my PB. Whereas at Grafham, where I didn't really do that, I ended up doing a 241 on a course that isn't really that much different. There's no hills in it, it was very undulating, but I think my strategy of just not attacking the hills at Grafham cost me, basically. We hit the target for the day with a 228, so that was obviously brilliant. The roads are bad, as has been noted in almost everyone else's video and even I think the race briefing. But as bad as they are clearly marked by the Outlaw team, and it's not actually that difficult to avoid some of the bad bits. There are some bits where there's just potholes the entire width of the road, but as long as you sort of slow down slightly for those and sort of hold onto your bottles, you'll be okay. It's not as bad as I was expecting. It's obviously not good, but it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. And also as well, the gravelly bit at the end, which is probably about a mile, maybe 2k at best, I actually found it quite fun. I think just because for most of the bike you've obviously been going quite hard and you're sort of trying the aero tuck and all that sort of stuff for as long as possible. I think the sort of change of scenery, not being able to put out as much power and just having to focus on being a bit more technical actually made it quite a bit fun. There's a lot of speed bumps though, but as long as you keep your eyes peeled, you'll be okay going through that. Right, so on to the tips for the bike. So I've got 2 tips for the bike leg. The first one is on Oxton Bank. Now, I'm an okay cyclist, like I say, my FTP is around 4 watts per kilo. So if you're also an okay cyclist, don't take Oxton Bank easy. I think for me, the actual steep bit was over in 2 minutes. And I expected it to be a lot longer. I was expecting a 5, 6, 7 minute climb. If I'd have known it was that, I probably would have gone really hard. I was literally chatting to people up the hill, asking them if this was the hill, and then people on the side cheering, I was asking them questions. And then you get to the summit and you're like, oh, it's over. But then you're rewarded with a near 6.5 kilometre descent. So go hard on Oxton Bank and then go hard on the descent as well, and you will be rewarded. I couldn't believe how many people I was absolutely flying past on the 6.5 kilometres after the climb. So that for that 6.5 kilometre stretch, I did it in like 9.5 minutes. I was averaging around 44 kilometres an hour, and I wasn't putting in that much effort. I was just continuing with what I thought was my sustainable effort across the thing. But people were obviously sitting up and trying to make the most of the descent to recover from Oxton Bank. But I think my one tip there would be to go hard on Oxton Bank and then carry on going hard for the 6 kilometre descent. I think you'll make up a lot of time in a lot of places by doing that. And then tip 2, which is sort of a mental thing, and I guess just to try and be positive, is say morning or thank you or cheers or whatever to every single marshal that you see, because 90 kilometres is a long distance. It's always going to be a long distance, no matter whether you're doing it in 2 hours like the pros or 4 hours at the back. It's still 90k. And there will be bits during the event or parts during the event where you will start to question why you've actually entered the event. So I think just saying hi to everyone you go past, or morning, even the other cyclists that you go past, I think just, well, for me anyway, helps cheer you up a bit and just takes away a bit of the pain as well of the event, and just improves, I think, the overall feeling on the bike. So that's my second tip. Just try and be positive as you're going through it. Right, so now we're back into T2 and another near 1 kilometre run through transition. I actually expected to not be able to run off the bike at all, because I'd gone relatively hard. For me, that's the hardest I've ever gone on the bike, for the 2.5 hours nearly. So I genuinely thought I wasn't going to be able to run at all, but luckily I settled into a relatively good pace actually. I think I was averaging around 4:15 for the first couple of K, but I think there might be a slight decline coming out of transition, so that helped. So the run course is 3 loops around the lake, 7K each, and I was hoping to break 90 again, but I think I ended up doing a 131 in the end, a low 131. But in terms of my pace for that run, it was actually my highest or my fastest average per kilometre pace of around, I think it was 4:17, 4:18 average. I think the only reason I've got faster times at other events, such as I think the Cotswolds and Grapham, were because those events came up slightly short. I don't know whether that's just because of GPS issues or whether they are just actually shorter events. Not massively shorter, you know, it might be a couple hundred metres, but that couple hundred metres actually costs you a minute, doesn't it? So yeah, like I say, I actually had my fastest average pace. Okay, and so for a tip for the run, is running around the lake is actually quite mentally difficult, and it's made even worse if there is wind. So as we were running back towards transition on each loop, so on the 3 loops, we did have a headwind. I don't know what the headwind was in terms of speed, but you could tell you were running into a headwind. So my tip is to either find someone running slightly faster than you and tuck in behind them and put in a bit of an effort, and let them break the wind and you sort of get some free speed off them, so tuck in behind them, or find someone slightly slower than you and just chill out behind them, again let them break the wind. You'll lose obviously a few seconds per kilometre, but the point of doing that is that you'll conserve some energy for them the other side of the lake, where you can go a bit harder with the tailwind. And if that isn't possible, just duck in behind everyone. That's because there will be people. You'll need to meander your way up the lake anyway. So I think actually on the 3 loops I was doing, I was averaging around 20 seconds a kilometre faster on the tailwind side of the lake compared to the headwind section of the lake. And that was almost like a conscious strategy. There was the second loop where I did actually tuck in behind someone who was probably doing a few seconds a kilometre faster than me. And I just used him basically to drag me up the one side of the lake, and then lost him at the aid station on the other side. And then you push on basically on the other side of the lake with the tailwind to help you. And yeah, I think the run in the end was, like I say, a 131. So finished overall in 5:01:51, I think it was. Bit gutted to not go sub 5. But like I say, the only goal for the day was to break 2:30 on the bike, which, you know, we achieved. So yeah, like I say, the overall event is pretty amazing. We're probably going to do it again next year, because we know a few people who are going to roll over to next year, so we'll get an entry in for that. Hopefully they'll switch the transition back to the shorter one. Hopefully everything else will be the same. Hopefully I can redeem myself in the swim, make up for the terrible performance I had this time. And yeah, I think that's it. Up next is IRONMAN 70.3 Stafford, which was the very first 70.3 that me and Georgie did. I'm going solo this time. Georgie hasn't entered it. So it'll be interesting to see how my times directly compare after 2 years worth of training. We were obviously meant to do it last year, but obviously it didn't happen. So it'll be interesting to see. The one target for that event is now going to be the swim. I'm going to aim to get a swim PB for that. So we've hit the previous targets of a run PB, the bike PB, and now going into Stafford, hopefully a swim PB, and then the final big triathlon of the year will be Weymouth, where hopefully we can string all 3 together. So if you've liked this video or liked this series, I guess click the like button. And if you want to see how I get on in Stafford and the training that's going into it, and obviously then Weymouth, click subscribe and you'll get notified. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.